Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This room feels like a warm hug. There are some of you whom I have not seen in a very long time, and it's great to see you. Let me level with you that I have a little bit of a sinus cough, so we're going to get through this together. Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey, other members of the Cabinet of Barbados, MP Edmund Hinkson, other members of the lower house, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I cried during my Senate presentation yesterday, and I have promised myself not to repeat that this evening. Yes? I can only cry once in a week. I'm not entirely sure where one begins telling the story of their life. But at the outset, let me say this. Sometimes it has been stories like mine that absolve us of the collective responsibility to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. It has been easy over the years to look at the relative success of some persons with disabilities and say, look, they survived and so can you. I'm going to ask that you don't take that from my story this evening. What I'm going to ask that you do take, though, is the resolve and the commitment to dismantling and shifting the realities that make my story, to the extent that it is, exceptional. Deal? Yes? Deal? Good. I imagine that almost immediately upon my birth, it was clear to my parents that raising me would be an exercise in faith and forbearance. An incredibly charming face and a body in an experience, or an experience in a body that there was no manual for. The eventual diagnosis of cerebral palsy was a relief to them. It gave them a reason for the fact that I entered the world early and at the very least needed more attention than my two brothers who preceded me. My early childhood was marked with doctor visits and therapy sessions, and as my mother tells me, many opinions about what I would never be able to do. And even in the face of professional pessimism, my parents believed. By way of context, I was raised by a mother who believes that all things are possible. Dr. Leacock nods knowingly. She's easily the most optimistic person I have ever met. I said I wasn't going to cry. On the other hand, my mother is also one in the defense. She's fearless in the defense of her children, and dare I say, her sweetest child. My brothers aren't here this evening, are they? Yeah, I could get away with that this evening. To begin a sentence, and my father has a quiet and stubborn resolve, and together, this makes them the perfect people to raise a child with a disability at a time when, according to most people, the prospects were not particularly good. And soon it became clear to my mother and father that they were going to be required to raise their voice again and again in defense of me, and that they would at some point have to teach me to do the same. To make matters worse, a short time after my birth, I began experiencing issues with my eyesight that seemed more serious than initially thought, And after lots of consternation, expense, and trips overseas, I was diagnosed with retinoblastoma, cancer of the eye. These two diagnoses meant that I would spend lots of time out of the island seeking medical attention. In fact, it was one term of every school year between 5 and 15. A frequent flyer, if you will. Not at all exciting, but a frequent flyer all the same. My childhood in the 1990s and early 2000s was marked by lots of trips to the Bridgetown Public Library, and when the offerings of the library became too limited, negotiating with my father to take me to bookstores around the island. Books were a place where I got to travel and roam freely into worlds beyond the bounds of the hospital and looking outside the expanse of the pasture that is behind our house, essentially. Through my reading, I developed a love of language and a curiosity about the world in which I lived. I delighted in both fiction and nonfiction, and perhaps to the surprise of many, the autobiographies or not to the surprise of many, the autobiographies of great leaders as well. My parents insisted that I watch the evening news and included me in conversations about national issues or the latest political gossip, and encouraged me to develop perspectives on issues and to find humor in the midst and of my situation and to think deeply. I am the youngest in a family of boys, and while my brothers seemed to almost instinctively understand my disability, they treated me no differently. I was required to be commanding and sharp and occasionally snarky, just occasionally. Nothing else would do. I know there's no manual, but the greatest gift I have ever received was that of my parents who tried and who allowed me to be human and whole, not merely as a reflection of their best wishes for me, but as a human being with growing dreams and aspirations that did not always reflect their own desires. And so to the parents who love me, and who loved me anyway, but who merely, and not who loved me anyway, but who merely and simply loved me. Thank you. I come from a village in the country, a village in which family was close-knit, and within my first friends, beyond my brothers, were cousins who included me in everything that they were doing. So that while the others were playing football or cricket, and I was never interested in either of the two exercises, I don't know if that was a chicken and egg situation. It was because of the disability I wasn't interested, or because they provided a space for me to enjoy the company and camaraderie and inclusion that made a difference in my life. Together, we laughed and conversed, and my cousins raced on a supersonic red bicycle with 3 wheels that my parents bought me one summer after I decided that I wanted to ride bicycles like everybody else. Oh. Outside my home, though, it was in the classroom that I became acutely aware of the limitations placed on me because of my disabilities. Not that my unique walk did not pose its own challenges, but I was singled out to be treated uniquely because of my disabilities. It was the 1990s, and educational opportunities for persons with disabilities were limited. Despite those who had gone before, the education system was still confounded by me. Someone with cerebral palsy and attendant fine motor challenges that necessitated the use of leg braces and crutches and sometimes wheelchairs, but who had no intellectual challenges. Recall with me that the principal modality of the classroom in the 1990s was chalk and talk. I dare say even walk, chalk, and talk. Teachers gave instructions exclusively through writing on the board or dictating, and your job was to copy and complete as quickly and as fulsomely as possible. My ability to do that was compromised by my diagnosis, and thus I struggled to take notes and complete assignments in the allotted time, but grasped information quickly and remembered it well. But a premium was placed on the things I could not do. Let me say that I had teachers, even in the midst of all of that, some of them here this evening, who encouraged me and who tried to do their best to accommodate me in the classroom. To Miss Dean, who, in addition to making me a lover of language and a stickler for the proper use of grammar and pronunciation, and Miss Jordan, who would copy notes and bring me to her desk and permit me to dictate my answers to her. I am deeply grateful. They both became a buffer, along with my family, in making me confident in the fact that I was worthy and that I was as brilliant as anyone else, and anyone who held another view was entitled to be wrong. My best friend, a classmate of mine for much of my primary school life, reminded me how badly I cried when these women left our school. I'm inclined to think that I was mourning a possibility I was not sure was available anywhere else. Let me take a quick diversion to tell you about my best friend. I met my best friend at 6 years old at one of the primary schools that I attended, where he was instructed to look out for me. And let's just say he never stopped looking out for me. And we have formed a friendship that has lasted through the ages, the good times and that 1 month of bad times. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. And to know us is to know that we are silly and that we laugh loudly at irreverent things and that we love kaiso and soca and dance hall. I digress. My gratitude extends far and deep to those friends and cousins and teachers who, on reflection, it occurred to me that perhaps they didn't always know what they were doing, that they could not be sure that their efforts would mean anything in the long run. But I'm grateful to them for doing the right thing, even when it was easier for them to do anything else. Eventually, though, the premium was placed on normalcy, both then and now, and I'm not going to cry this evening. And it made it so that teachers and educational technocrats shared the view that as a result of my disability, I did not belong in a mainstream classroom, even despite evidence of my capacity. These indignities are not easily forgotten. The day an educator told my parents that I should not do the common entrance exam, but instead go to one of the vocational centers on the island is a day I will never forget. I can remember what my mother was wearing, a burgundy silk blouse where everything in that room was, the miniature table, the brightly colored posters on the wall, and the color of the sheets. I came home and flooded with tears. My parents became my fiercest advocates, taking on a system that was intent on not changing the way things were done, a reality that threatened to diminish my dreams of becoming whatever a son raised by a mother who believed that all things were possible dreamed of becoming. I saw people with disabilities who were no less capable than me, but who did not have the relentless parents who had the wherewithal to navigate systems. And at that time, and in light of this, I developed the view that rights were important, if not essential, and it was critical for those rights to be enshrined in the systems that we develop. And we must develop those systems, that are permissive and accommodating of the dreams and aspirations of people, even and especially when they're different than us. Given the advocacy and the relentlessness of my mother and father, I was permitted to do the common entrance exam. And secondary school permitted me the space to prove that I was able. After the bitter battle to do the common entrance, here was a chance for me to prove my mettle. Let's be clear, I have no romanticism about the common entrance. In fact, I think it the centerpiece of an elitist and colonial education system that fails too many, and it falls to us to reform it. After Ellerslie, I entirely enjoyed my years as a student of mass communication. I remember my childhood almost exclusively through news events. The Oklahoma City bombing, Columbine, the death of Princess Diana, September 11th. I was interested in media from really young. Somehow, there was always an advocate newspaper in Daddy's car in the early days after we got a vehicle. I don't know why, but there always was. And Dr. Alison Leacock became my perennial companion at 7 p.m. in the evening. And that's where our love affair began. I had the opportunity, as Eddie indicated, to intern at media houses, which provided me with the chance to learn about this country and this region while telling stories, which is still one of my favorite things. I entered the University of the West Indies to pursue a degree in political science and law, and from day one, thoroughly enjoyed it. Here I was engaged on issues that had long held my attention and interest. A highlight in my first year was Tracy Robinson's constitutional law class. She commanded the class and the material with such ease and made us all believe that we could be as bright as she was. In that class, you came into contact not only with the supreme law of the land, but with the problems and the promise of this Caribbean region. That class and others underscored for me what I always knew, that the prejudice and exclusion I faced existed alongside so many other instances where people were treated less favorably because of immutable characteristics, things they could do little about. When you are taught by some of the people who taught me, who not only bring knowledge and pedagogical skills to bear, it is hard not to be optimistic about what this region can be. I have a little bit of a love affair with teachers, and so I speak of Tracy Robinson and Wendy Grande and Professor Simeon McIntosh and countless others. I recall on my first day as an undergraduate student on the campus, Simeon McIntosh, who was then acting dean, called me to his office, and after a lengthy chat, he said, "I don't know what the university provides for persons with disabilities, but if you need anything, you come find me." That began years of a relationship of encouragement, even in the darkest days of my sojourn. His words have never left me, words of encouragement that said, "You matter, and that your words matter, and the world needs you." I make that point, I tell you that story to perhaps make the point that good people matter as much as good systems. And so I encourage you to be good people. As I indicated, that while at the University of the West Indies, I somehow ended up on the board of the Barbados Council for the Disabled. I do not even recall specifically how. I imagine it was at the insistence of Benita Phillips, who saw the late Benita Phillips, who was a champion for persons with disabilities and whose tireless advocacy led to the improvement and the broadening of our understanding about the realities of persons with disabilities. And the minister referred to the measures of the budget and the broader systemic work that the Commission has started around disability. And sometimes I sit and think, what if she could see a world like this, a Barbados like this? This gave me, my membership on the board gave me formal proximity to the issues of persons with disabilities and highlighted to me that my perspective as a young person could make a difference in their resolution. I must say thank you to the staff of the council who valued my voice and input in many of the council's major initiatives. And they are in some ways the unsung heroes of this movement, and I must take the opportunity to thank them, not only for their contribution to my development in this space, but for the work they do every day for persons with disabilities. Join me in applauding them. Allow me to flick back to 1999. During the 1999 election, a teacher assigned a project for us to follow the elections, the candidates, the manifestos, the speeches. And this is where I fell in love with politics. I recall that election as exciting not only for its fairly historic results, but also for all of its very entertaining sideshows. I have observed many campaigns since then, but none of them have been as entertaining. It was in that election that I attended political meetings and experienced the energy and the buzz of those gatherings. I saw individuals who would come to help direct the progress of this country for many years to come. I was at the time grappling with the particulars of disability and realized that the decisions governments made were critical to the fortunes of ordinary people like me. And as a result, in the aftermath of the 1999 election, I sat in the corner of my childhood bedroom and wrote a letter to the re-elected Prime Minister of Barbados, Owen Arthur, asking him what he and his re-elected administration would do about disability education. He invited me to government headquarters and we dialogued. A now twice elected Prime Minister took my concerns and perhaps what others may have conceived of as my precociousness. He took genuine interest. I was 9, 10. I was born in 1989. Yes, I was 10 years old. And in part, it ignited in me the belief that through my action, there was a space to contribute and to advance disability policy in this country. In every conversation we had since, he shared what he hoped to do for persons with disabilities. And the fact that I get to be some small part of your kind, some small part of continuing that work means the world to me. Fast forward to January of 2022, I was sitting and minding my business, as some of us like to say. Senator Cummings nods knowingly. After a long day of meetings, I received a call, and I neither recognized the number nor the voice on the other end, and that is ironic. The voice introduced herself only as Mia, and then my tired brain figured out that it was the Prime Minister of Barbados and that she would go on to invite me into the upper house. The ensuing days were filled with calls and congratulatory messages, but the weight of the appointment only truly sunk in on the morning of the swearing-in ceremony. There I was, gathered with individuals, some of whose names I learnt because of that assignment to chronicle the election of 1999. I remember signing the requisite documents in State House, and across the room, Madam Deputy President looked at me and she said, "Are you nervous?" And I said, yes. Deputy President of the Senate, of course. And I said, yes. And she said, "You're supposed to be." She hasn't stopped ribbing me since. In many ways, contributing to the development of policy and law to protect persons with disabilities is a full circle moment. This is a thing that I and so many children with disabilities needed 20 and 30 years ago. It is unfinished work. And I do this very important work so that another child doesn't have to go through the indignity of hearing how they're just not good enough, how their country is not prepared to make space for their capacity and contribution, how the promise of their country is only a pinky promise to them. Systems must be made better so that another student with a disability doesn't have to recall exclusion. The majority of Barbadians, I believe, want to do the right thing. But I think that they want to know how to do the right thing. I think that is something that the expansive consultations that the committee engaged in revealed. So many people with whom we consulted said to us subtly that they did not know how to help people with disabilities. They did not know how to make a difference in their own corners. I also know that as a country, we have the ability to look at the perennial issues, those we have ignored for too long, and say that the time has come for us to fix them. Our country is better for the reality and for the grappling with it. Our social policy, as I said yesterday in the Senate, is replete with examples. The Family Law Act, our early progress around SRH legislation, and the initial steps around free education. We can do this again. And in relation to disability and many other matters that ail us. In reflecting on the Barbados of yesteryear, there is and was much that was good about Barbados in my growing up, in my mother's growing up, and in my father's growing up, and in my grandmother's growing up. There was much to be learnt from the spirit of small villages and resilient families living in the shadows of plantations. As I reflect on a life like mine, let it be absolutely clear that while there was much of doing good and doing better in my growing up and my mother's growing up and my grandmother's growing up, so much would have made a difference to those individuals. And as I come close to sharing these early chapters of my life with you, allow me to share the love I have for my grandmother. It's not gonna cry. My grandmother is one of the great loves of my life. I believe I said it yesterday in the Senate, and I have learned so much from her. If you're around me often enough, it won't be long before I recall some saying from my grandmother, some story from the times I spent with her in New York whilst seeking medical attention. During that period, she was a pillar of support, and we built a bond that is unmatched. And has not faded, even as her memory now fades, given the ravages of dementia. A friend of mine said to me recently, your grandmother has lost her memory, but it seems she has left it to you. Forgive me for sharing the poet in me, the lover of words and language, held by the hearts of the educators and mentors, some of whom I have mentioned, and summers filled with words in honor of my dear grandmother. If a boy's ability to change the world grows in direct relation to the lessons he learned from his grandmother, then any history I make must be credited to a woman from the country, a woman who left her own to find work in other fields, the baby of a family, my mother's mother, and my greatest teacher. Grande taught me to be proper but not pious, like all the times she reminded me that intimacy is not a bad thing. To ask what I want to know, like all the times she told me to, like the time she told me to ask the doctor if I would see with a marble eye. I asked her and she said, ask the doctor. To be loud when the ends justify the means. Like the April afternoon she blocked a New York City hospital waiting area to get me the treatment I deserved. To pay attention to details, like when she would make me watch her favorite soap operas and tell her exactly what happened when she got home. To accept that good things come from bad experiences, like each time she forced me to drink tomato juice because it would help with the cancer. To know that memories are all that we have and that you never quite know what you have until it's gone. Like the first time, she didn't remember my name. I miss the light in her eyes and her irreverence and her deep belief in me. She will celebrate her 81st birthday tomorrow. But because of the ravages of dementia, could not be with us this evening. Because of those experiences and the deep beliefs of women like my grandmother and my mother, I work to make sure that this country treats people with disabilities well, to remind us that we are people with talents and dreams and aspirations, and that Barbados as a country needs to be and can be better for us. Better not just for people with disabilities, but for children and women and all Barbadians who, by the nature of who they are, suffer exclusion and marginalization. We can take the lessons of small villages and families and mothers and grandmothers and translate them into a politics and a policy of love and care so that we build a better Barbados now. Granny, happy birthday. And that's it, folks. I ended up crying anyway.